It took just 7 seconds. In less than the time it takes to draw a deep breath, the passenger vessel Hableány, whose name ironically means mermaid, disappeared beneath the surface of the Danube, dragging those on board down with her, right in front of the Hungarian parliament. The consequences of the tragedy would echo far beyond the banks of the river and raise troubling questions about accountability and safety on Europe's busiest waterways. The Hungarian capital, Budapest, is cut in half by the mighty Danube River. It's actually two cities, with the historic hills of Buda on one side and the grand boulevards of Pest on the other. It's a busy river, teeming day and night with vessels of all sizes, from small sightseeing boats to massive floating hotels, all offering tourists the chance to view the city's illuminated splendor from the water. On May 29, 2019, a storm had brought persistent heavy rain to the area throughout the day. Because of this, the water in the Danube was higher than usual and flowing at a fierce 4,000 to 4,500 cubic meters per second, nearly double its normal rate. By that evening, as the rain eased off, the river had become busier, with some parts becoming congested. Vessels passed closely by each other, jostling for position in the waterway. Among those ships were the Hableány, or Mermaid, and the Viking Seagen. They couldn't have been more different. The Hableány, or Mermaid, was a small passenger vessel built in 1949 in the Soviet Union at the Kherson Shipbuilding and Ship Repair Plant in present-day Ukraine. She was a 50-ton Moskvich-type motorized passenger vessel, measuring just 27 meters long and 5 meters wide. It had been operated by Panorama Deck Ltd. from 2003 onward as a sightseeing boat for tourists and private events. At the helm of the Hableány that night was Captain Laszlo Lombos, a ship commander with around 40 years of experience. According to his colleagues, Laszlo had an exemplary record. With him was another experienced sailor, 53-year-old János Pethau. The Viking Seagen was a brand new floating colossus, a hotel ship measuring 135 meters in length and almost 12 meters in width. It was almost 5 times longer and more than twice as wide as the Hableány. With a displacement of over 2,500 tons, it outweighed the smaller vessel by a factor of more than 50. The Viking Seagen, commanded by Ukrainian Captain Yuri Chaplinsky, was traveling from Budapest to Passau, Germany. On board were 7 crew members, 43 hotel staff, and 184 passengers. As the dusk fell over Budapest on May 29, 2019, both vessels prepared to navigate the rain-soaked waters of the Danube. At 2020, the Hableány began its 1-hour sightseeing cruise with 33 South Korean tourists and 2 Hungarian crew members on board. Most of the Koreans were traveling with their families. The youngest passenger was just 6 years old, and the oldest was 71. Among them was Kim Jong-mi, with her sister, brother, and daughter, Yunara. At 8:47 p.m., after cruising downstream to a downtown section of the river, the Hableány turned around under the Széchenyi Chain Bridge and began its return journey to its berth at Jazai Mari Square. At roughly the same time, the Viking Seagen was departing upstream from a mooring point on the left bank, just beyond the chain bridge. The ship began its journey by traveling along the left bank at a slow speed of around 2 kilometers per hour. Captain Chaplinsky later claimed he moved slowly so his passengers could get a better view of the beautiful Hungarian Parliament building as they approached it. This was too slow for the Hableány. At 8:56 p.m., they caught up with the slow-moving Viking Seagen and decided to overtake the bigger ship, passing to its port side while sounding a signal to let them know they were there. The smaller ship then moved quickly ahead of the floating hotel. After passing the Parliament building, the Viking Seagen began to accelerate and started to plot a course to pass under the Margaret Bridge. For some reason, Captain Chaplinsky didn't let the Hableány know he was about to overtake her or sound any signal at all. At around 9 p.m., not realizing the Viking Seagen was trying to pass them, the Hableány also moved to pass under the bridge. When it was just 190 meters ahead of the bigger ship, the Hableány went from being to the right of the hotel vessel to the left. It was now in the Viking Seagen's path. Still unaware of the smaller ship, Captain Chaplinsky continued to increase his ship's speed, reaching around 12 kilometers per hour before the bridge. This was faster than the Hableány, and as they approached the Margaret Bridge, the two began to come closer and closer together. They reached the bridge at exactly the same time. At exactly 5 minutes past 9 p.m. and 35 seconds, young Mi and her family were sat at the back of the Hableány. Without warning, her brother began to scream, and young Mi turned to look straight into the eyes of another passenger. But they weren't the eyes of someone on the Hableány. They were the eyes of someone traveling on the Viking Seagen. At that moment, the bigger ship, now traveling at 13 to 14 kilometers per hour, crashed into the stern of the Hableány. Then, everything happened so quickly that our explanation will take longer than the tragedy itself. There were two jolts. The first was as the ships collided, spinning the Hableány around. The second was the Viking Seagen rolling over the smaller vessel, pushing it underwater. It wasn't just the speed difference that caused the horror, but something called the Bernoulli principle. This is when faster-moving fluids, like those between the two ships, create less pressure, while slower-moving fluids, like those beneath the boats, create more pressure, actively sucking the smaller vessel underwater. The fast current that day didn't help either. The whole tragedy took only 7 seconds. 7 seconds were all the time the passengers and crew had to react to the unfolding catastrophe. Most passengers were inside the cabin due to the rain conditions, though one survivor later recalled that perhaps 20 people were outside on the deck. Among them were young Mi and her family, who were thrown free of the sinking vessel into the river. The moments after those 7 seconds were chaos. According to another ship captain working on the river that day, Zoltán Tolnay, no emergency was signaled on any shipping radio channel. The Mahart Pas Navi event ship Budapest was the first to spot that something terrible had happened, and it was from that ship that the warning "man overboard" was first heard. The Viking Seagen performed a stop maneuver, but as it would have been even more dangerous for the vessel to stay between the bridge piers, it sailed upstream under the Margaret Bridge before stopping completely. As they moved away, the crew threw life rings into the water, and the ship's lifeboat began rescuing people who had been thrown into the river. Young Mi spotted one of the rings. She later said, "I'm afraid of the water because I can't swim," so she frantically grabbed anything she could, finally getting a hold of a ring and waiting for rescue. At roughly 9 minutes past 9, 4 minutes after the collision, the skipper of the Viking Seagen reported the incident to the NavInfo radio station. It wasn't until 9:15 that the Police Activity Management Center became aware of the accident after a civilian contacted them. After getting that civilian report, the National Ambulance Service sent 14 ambulances to the scene. The first Danube water police boat arrived at 21:29, nearly 25 minutes after the collision, and a navigation closure was ordered for the section between Margaret Bridge and Elizabeth Bridge. By then, darkness had fallen. The rain had picked up again, increasing the speed of the Danube's flow even more, and it was cold. The water temperature was just 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, cold enough to cause hypothermia in minutes. At first, they focused on the site of the accident under the bridge. Young Mi was rescued, but she didn't know where her family was. Thankfully, her daughter was safe. During the collision, Nara had bounced against tables and chairs on that rear deck as she fought to get to the surface. If it hadn't been for another survivor screaming at her to start swimming, she might not have made it. Just before midnight, the search was extended to the entire section of the river below Budapest. 7 people were rescued near the scene and taken to the hospital with minor injuries and symptoms of hypothermia. At the press conference held shortly after midnight the next day, they confirmed 7 deaths, with 16 people still missing. Among them was Yang Mi's brother and sister. The tragedy immediately took on an international dimension. Moon Jae-in, president of South Korea, ordered a government-level operative group to be set up to help those affected by the disaster. The foreign minister, Kang Kyung-hwa, personally traveled to Budapest. To find out exactly what had happened, they had to raise the Hableány. But that wasn't easy. The floating crane they used would only work when the unusually high waterline dropped, so they had to wait for the rains to stop and the river to recede. Engineers from the Budapest University of Technology and Economics worked out that they'd need 4 wire rope straps to lift the Hableány. 1 at the bow, 2 in the middle under the engine room where the risk of the ship breaking in two was greatest, and 1 under the stern. On June 11, 2019, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the lifting of the Hableány began. By 8:30 a.m., 4 bodies had been found. First was that of Captain Laszlo Lombos, who was lifted from the captain's bridge. Later, they also found a young girl who had been traveling on the ship with her mother. More were found inside the ship. Divers battled through broken, upturned furniture to fit pumps that could draw out all the water. They were left with 80 centimeters of mud, filled with the bodies of the remaining missing passengers. After the rescue operations, the Hableány was towed on a barge to Chepel, where the police examination continued. Just 24 hours after the disaster, the police announced that they were suspicious of the actions of Captain Czaplinski. He was brought in as a suspect and subsequently detained. The Ukrainian captain denied breaking any rules or committing any crime. One of his legal representatives, Balas Mtoth, told the press that the man had been a ship commander for 44 years and had never had an accident before. But it turned out that Captain Czaplinski had done this before. In April of that year, he'd been commanding another hotel ship, the Viking Eden, when it collided with an oil tanker in the Netherlands. It also appeared that he had deleted messages from his phone right after the incident, a highly suspicious move. On September 8th of 2020, the Hableány trial began. The captain was charged by the prosecution with endangering water transportation, resulting in a fatal mass casualty incident through negligence, and 35 counts of failure to provide assistance. At the court, Czaplinski said that he would not make a new statement and refused to answer questions. The captain said he saw the smaller ship overtaking the Viking Seagen from the right, but didn't keep his eye on it because he was concentrating on passing under the bridge. However, expert opinion contradicted several of the captain's claims. According to the expert, the Viking Seagen overtook the Hableány from the left, not the right. That means the captain couldn't have properly assessed whether or not he had enough room to overtake the Hableány. If he hadn't increased his speed to 11 kilometers per hour, the accident could have been avoided. This matched the testimony of several of the survivors, including Kim Jong-mi and Yoon Nara. On September 26, 2023, the Pest Central District Court sentenced the captain to 5.5 years in prison at first instance, but this was annulled by the Budapest Metropolitan Court on January 15, 2024, which claimed judicial bias. To this day, the 2019 Budapest ship disaster is the most serious tragedy in history on the Budapest section of the Danube. The final toll was devastating. 27 people lost their lives, including 25 South Korean passengers and the ship's 2 Hungarian crew members, while 1 person is still missing, despite extensive search efforts. Following the accident, Hungarian boat tourism suffered, and most South Korean tourists left Hungary almost immediately afterward. Many others canceled sightseeing cruises and other water tours, causing great financial losses. The tragedy prompted calls for improved safety measures on the Danube. Several proposals were made, including reducing ship traffic, banning or restricting the movement of hotel ships, and improving communication on the river. The 2019 Budapest ship disaster stands as a stark reminder of how quickly tragedy can strike, even in the most picturesque of settings. In just 7 seconds, the lives of 27 people were extinguished, families were shattered, and the tranquil waters of the Danube became a graveyard. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing. It's helping a lot.